Their Gospels reveal ideas and doctrines far removed from those we understand as Christian today. But there's one issue in particular which dominates a great number of the lost Gospels. It's not about the hierarchy of the church or the path to salvation. It's about the very nature of Christ himself. Today, Christian beliefs about Jesus are clear. He was simultaneously human and divine. It's a revolutionary idea, but we can easily forget that it's one which only emerged after 3 centuries of bitter debate. The issue was, how could Jesus be both God and man? And there's one lost gospel in which the extremes of this conflict are very clearly revealed. It's a work which shockingly suggests that Jesus was never human at all, and it's attributed to his closest disciple, Mary Magdalene's arch-rival. I'm talking, of course, about this man, St. Peter. In Christian tradition, he's Jesus' chief apostle, his right-hand man, and the rock on which his church was built. Quite literally, if you believe the tradition, that the bones found under here are of the great man himself. He was the humble fisherman that became the keeper of the keys to heaven. What better witness could there be to what really happened during the life of Jesus? We have a couple of letters claiming to be from Peter in the New Testament, but surely, if there was a Gospel of Peter, it would have been important enough to make it into the Bible. Well, there is, and it didn't. So, what's the story? Scholars had always known about a Gospel of Peter because of tantalizing references to it in other Christian texts from as early as the 2nd and 3rd centuries. But their reaction to it is rather surprising. The church historian Eusebius wrote about the Gospel in 300 AD, but rather than singing its praises, he included it in a list of heretical forgeries. So what was it about the Gospel of Jesus' most trusted disciple, Peter, that was so dangerous? Well, for centuries, scholars didn't know. No manuscript of it survived, so its contents remained a mystery until a chance discovery. The year is 1886, and a team from the French Archaeological Mission are excavating the grave of a monk in the mysterious town of Akhmim on the east bank of the Upper Nile. The archaeologists then uncover a codex parchment buried with the monk, and after translating it, they quickly realize the magnitude of their discovery. A portion of the Gospel according to Peter had been restored to the Christian community after having been lost for centuries. Just think of it, a Gospel written by the man who knew Jesus best of all. This has to be big news. But its contents revealed something that would have rocked the early church. Whereas in the New Testament Gospels, Jesus dies, in the Gospel of Peter, he doesn't. The image of Jesus suffering and dying is one of the most widespread and powerful in the Christian church. And it's remembered very literally by pilgrims at Easter. Every year, thousands of Christians come to Jerusalem for the Good Friday procession. They pack the route that Jesus is supposed to have taken, carrying the cross to his death. The idea of Jesus' agony on the cross is so ingrained in the human psyche that it's difficult to imagine a Christianity without it. But unlike the account of the crucifixion in the canonical Gospels, in the Gospel of Peter, the story of Jesus' ordeal on the cross is one completely devoid of suffering. The text claims that as he was being crucified, he was silent, having no pain. The account also carefully avoids saying that Jesus died. This failure to undergo fundamental human experiences such as pain, suffering and death would have rung alarm bells for many in the early church. Were the supporters of the Gospel of Peter suggesting that Jesus wasn't human? Although Christians today take for granted the idea that Jesus was both man and God, the Gospel of Peter very clearly shows that for the first Christians, this was still a matter of debate. This was a church in confusion, where ideas about the balance between Jesus' humanity and divinity were hotly contested. Was he divine? Was he merely human? Or was he somewhere in between? The people who upheld the Gospel of Peter were at the heart of this conflict. For them, Jesus was purely divine. He only appeared to be human, and his suffering and death were a deception. I can understand their thinking. If Jesus was God, surely he couldn't have suffered. After all, God can't die. This school of thought came to be called Docetism, a name derived from the Greek word dokesis, which means appearance or semblance. And those who were part of the sect were called the Doceti, literally illusionists, those who believed Jesus' humanity wasn't real. We don't know who wrote the Gospel of Peter, but it certainly wasn't the only tract about the nature of Jesus circulating in the early church. There were other texts promoting alternative ideas. If the Docetic views of Jesus lay at one extreme, then there was another equally controversial group whose views lay at the other. Whilst the Docetists claimed Jesus only appeared to be mortal, this sect believed he was most definitely a human, but one hijacked by God. Here in Israel, traces of another lost gospel can be found. It's a text which shockingly suggests that Jesus, although singled out by God, was born a mere mortal. It was the work of a sect now virtually forgotten, known as the Ebionites. They were Christians, but they were strongly committed to maintaining the Jewishness of their faith. They believed Jesus was the Jewish Messiah sent by God to fulfill Jewish scripture. Although this sect were by no means the only Jewish Christians at the time, after all, Jesus had been a Jew, as had all his earliest followers. The Ebionites provoked some of the most vociferous opposition. Their name comes from the Hebrew word Ebion, meaning poor. It was a term their opponents used to their advantage, accusing them not of being poor in material wealth, but in understanding. Unlike other Christian groups such as the Gnostics and the Docetics, Although the Ebionites must have written their own Gospels and treatises, none of them have actually survived. In fact, the only reason we know about them at all is because their heresies have been immortalized in the works of their opponents. Glimpses of the Gospel have surfaced in the writings of an early Christian named Epiphanius. One of his most lengthy texts is known as the Panarion, and in it he attacks no fewer than 80 heretical groups and their books,